So the next exercise is about darning and using that darning stitch for quick repairs. You know, I've actually used this to do some mending on my husband's jeans when he's torn a hole in them. And the way that you use this is that you actually, have that piece of fabric that has a little hole in it, and you would put a piece of either interfacing or a scrap piece of fabric or something underneath the tear in the garment. And then what you're going to do is just select your darning stitch, which is the bottom last one on the icon on the screen, and it looks similar to this little picture that we've got in our workbook. But over on the screen, actually, it's number 15 right there. And the way that we're going to work this is we are going to be using our buttonhole foot R. And this time we're not going to be pulling down the buttonhole lever like we do with a pre-measured buttonhole. Okay, so this does not come down. You leave that up hidden in its little spot. And you have two choices. This is going to make a pre-measured size. And I think that actually it's about, gosh, I don't know exactly the length of it, but this is the way that it's going to look. And this is about 16 rows of stitches. And it actually, this is a shorter one than what I'm going to show you this one in a second. It actually stitches about double this length, and it just comes back and forth until it fills in this whole area. And you can picture that if your tear in your fabric was underneath here with that extra fabric on the back side, that it would do a nice job of covering up that hole in your fabric. So this is how it looks, and I'll show you how it sews. So like I said, it is a pre-measured size, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch it at the pre-measured size. And then I'll also show you how you make it as a smaller one. It's super simple. So I'm just going to put my fabric underneath the foot, lower the foot down, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up my bobbin thread just for fun. Got two different colors going on here. And just begin sewing. All right, and you're going to see that we've got the machine going backwards and forward until it finishes up that whole pre-measured size. And basically what that pre-measured size is it's the width. It's about 9 millimeters, I think, maybe a little bit more, but it's that entire width of that opening on the presser foot. So when it's completed its stitching, it's going to go ahead and stop all on its own. I've not tried it before, but I suppose that you probably could actually stop it before if you didn't want it to be quite that wide. All right, and my thread is being cut, and there's my darning right there. What's come up on the screen of the machine is I can restart to make that same size, or if I wanted to do a different size, I could X out the screen, which I just did. And I'm going to cut this thread out so it's not in the way, and I'm going to show you how you would do a smaller length of that stitch. All right, so basically it's the same kind of thing. What I'm going to do, ladies, is I'm actually going to put some stitches going in this direction on here. All right, let's pretend that we really are fixing a hole in our fabric. I'm going to zoom in there, and what I'm going to try to do is drop my needle down right on the front edge of that darning that I just completed there. You know, it actually makes kind of a pretty stitch also. So I'm just going to start sewing, and what I'm going to do is that when I get to the back edge of what's been stitched here already, I'm going to touch my reverse button. So I'm going to go kind of slow. All right, and I'm going to touch reverse, and that should pre-measure it to come back forward. All right, so it's not quite as long as that first section of stitches, so it'll be just as wide. How about if I try to hit the... I better not. I was going to experiment with touching my auto button to see what would happen. Let's just let that one finish off. It makes a really pretty texture also. Okay, so there's some darning using the darning function on the machine. There's also some instructions in the manual. If your pattern were not to be nice and square like how mine is, that means that your stitch balance might need to be adjusted a little bit. And what we've got going on here on our instruction sheet is it's giving us some instructions on, what you would do to try to correct that so that you would get a nice rectangle shape rather than one that's slightly skewed. That comes under your adjusting screen. I think, let's see. Oops. I'm gonna look at this. I'm going to move the camera over just so that you can see it. I don't have to do that obviously on my machine, but this is the bottom part of that darning screen function, and it's just giving you some instructions. If you need it, if it was veering up towards that direction, you probably would want to be, you know, adjusting your minus and plus buttons to get a nice straight rectangle on your darning stitch. Okay, isn't that fun? I bet you can think of some functions for that as well. Okay, so we're back for the very final summation about our buttonholes. And this is my buttonhole page that I've made to put inside of my workbook. As you can see, it's a little bit different than what I used in my stitch book a little while ago. What I did here is I just went ahead and I stitched out every single buttonhole that's in the program. I did a couple of samples of darning. Here, as I zoom in, you're going to be able to see that I deliberately used two different colors of thread so that we could see, you know, what that pattern would look like if we ever needed to double up on that darning stitch by doing it in two different directions. Okay, so there's some darning stitches, and these are the fly stitches and the eyelets. And then down below, one of the other things I did to connect these two pieces of fabric together was that I did use that bee foot and some small piping to demonstrate using the buttonhole foot to insert a small piping. So I did that deliberately, and I will make a note on here on my fabric later on that that's what that is all about. So then I went ahead and I made two of the memorized buttonholes here. This is the original one, and then this is the copy. All right, and again, that's memorized stitch number 2. And then over here I did a sample of a corded buttonhole. And I did deliberately leave my threads hanging out there so that I would remember that that's how the thread goes in there. And then down below, I just did a little decorative technique that you might want to think about using. You know, maybe you might want to decorate a pillow or a little girl's dress or an apron or something along those lines, where I just used buttonholes that I spaced out evenly, and I inserted a piece of ribbon and then added in a decorative stitch at the bottom just to kind of jazz up a little decorative buttonhole. The way that I chose to do this, I actually found a button that was similar in circumference to, or the diameter of the button was similar to the width of my ribbon, and that's how I pre-measured the buttonholes. If I were to do it again, and the other thing I did do actually was that I used, remember when I was talking about loosening the screw up there, either to make your buttonhole a little bit longer or a little bit shorter? I went ahead and I did make it shorter because I was experimenting at the time with, I did one experimental buttonhole for that beading technique, and I did shorten it all the way down to as short as it would let it go. And you know, it actually is a little bit too, the buttonholes are a little bit too wide for that particular piece of ribbon. But so if I were to do this again, and as I would suggest to you, go for a button that is a little bit smaller than how wide your ribbon is if you're going to do this beading technique. Okay, so there basically is my sample that's going to go inside of my workbook. I wanted to briefly go over a couple of the boo-boos that I have here. One of the things that I'm showing here, and I just kind of ended up chopping this thing off, I was having thread breakage when I was trying to make my corded buttonholes. There were two problems. One of them was I discovered that the thread, it was a polyester thread, and I couldn't break it with my hands, but for some reason it wasn't feeding well through my needle, and that's why I was getting those breaks. And actually the break was happening on the final pass as the zigzag stitch was forming over the last part of our corded buttonhole, and it was breaking. It broke 2 times consistently in the same spot. What I had not noticed prior to this problem happening was that I actually had a number 14 top stitch needle in my machine. And my conclusion is that probably what was happening is that long eye on the needle was just too much space, and as the machine was doing this little zigzag, my thread was moving too much inside of that needle, and that's what was causing the breakage of the thread. So anyway, that was a little boo-boo sample there that I thought I probably ought to talk to you about. Remember to make sure that you've got the proper size and type of needle in your machine for the fabric and the technique that you're using. And then another little kind of boo-boo over here, when I was practicing on making a memorized buttonhole, it was this one right here. I did fine at the first part of the design, and then I just kind of lost concentration and I forgot to hit my reverse button when I got back down to the starting line so that the machine would know to go back up again. And so that buttonhole was a bust. But then I tried it again, and this time what I did with this buttonhole is I widened the space in between the two columns of stitches just to see, you know, that I wanted to make that slit a little bit wider. So again, you know, you can always experiment with those features, making your buttonhole slits wider and making your buttonholes wider as well. Over here, I did these two identical buttonholes, but this was the original one, and then this is the one with a cord added into it, just so that you can see the difference in how that buttonhole actually looks. I mean, besides the color, that you can see actually that it has a significant amount more stability to it. So I really like the way that those corded buttonholes come out. A little bit difficult to do to keep that thread hooked into the foot, but I think that when they do come out nice, they really come out nice and they're great. I think that's probably about it that I wanted to share with you about our buttonholes. Remember that you do always need to practice them, and also just try to think about them in creative ways, and excuse me, kick the camera, and also to use the proper needle, proper threads. Typically you're going to be using either decorative stitching threads or just the matching thread that goes along with your garment. And anyway, play around with them, have fun with them, because Janome buttonholes are actually famous. I remember many years ago when I was looking at sewing machines, I remember reading different reviews on the pros and the cons of various brands. And one of the things that I very specifically remember reading about was that Janome buttonholes were the best buttonholes of any of the home machines that were on the market at that current time. And so, you know, you've got that in your toolbox also. So here we go. I want you all to go ahead and make up your stitch samples and have something that you can put inside of your workbook and have fun with them, okay? So that's about it for now, and have fun making your Janome buttonholes on your 15,000 for your workbook. Thanks for watching the video, and I hope that I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.